Welcome everybody to the Digital Ag series. I think this is the last one of the year, and we've had an opportunity to hear from a number of different speakers through the semester that have all different kinds of expertise in data analysis, signal processing, digital forestry, digital agriculture, hardware, software, etc. As we were thinking a little bit about, as the leadership team was thinking a little bit about the seminar series this spring, we were thinking these are some people that it would be nice. What we're trying to do is build bridges across disciplines. And we were thinking a little bit about the importance of building linkages on campus. And so we've got people coming back and forth. We call it back and forth across State Street from the engineering side to the ag side and science side. And we were also interested in exploring externally strong programs in digital agriculture in various aspects. And so one of the points of discussion was the University of Illinois has been very successful in developing a digital ag program, and there's a lot of things about their program that we'd really like to emulate the best parts of that. So as we were thinking about emulating the best parts of the digital ag platform at Illinois, I said, wow, I know one of the guys that's involved. Maybe we can invite him to come for a seminar. So today we're going to hear from Dr. Vikram Adve. He's the Donald B. Gillies Professor of Computer Science. He's got a really amazing track record of success in this space. And he runs the AIFARMS, and there's a whole series of digital ag projects that they've been successful in attracting to Illinois. And so I'm really excited to hear the story that you have to tell about the diverse team that you put together to address this complex issue and your perspective on what's next. And hopefully ideas and opportunities to engage, maybe because we're only 2 hours apart or something like that. So Vikram, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Mitch. I really appreciate the chance to come out and talk. Mitch, in fact, is on the scientific advisory board of one of our main projects, which is the AI Institute, AIFARMS. And I'm going to say a lot more about AIFARMS in the talk, but that's how I got to know Mitch. Mitch, I think, is probably very closely connected with Matt Hudson and some of the other faculty who work on agriculture and genomics and other topics like that. I can step back. That's a problem. And so I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again for the invitation. Before I get into AIFARMS and kind of the main topic of the presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of context about the broader structure for digital agriculture research and education that we have at Illinois. So we have a center called the Center for Digital Ag, which was working just a few minutes ago. Sorry. So we have a center called the Center for Digital Agriculture, which was created about 5 years ago as an organization to catalyze, sort of provide some formal structure to collaborative research between engineering and agriculture. And I'm a co-director of the center along with Matt Hudson, who's the colleague I mentioned earlier. He's a professor in crop sciences. So he's kind of the ag person in the room, and I'm the computer science person, although he knows a lot more about computing than I know about ag from doing computational genomics. So I'll just say a few words about CDA and then dive into AIFARMS. Broadly, CDA covers research, education, and extension, and the broad goal is to solve agriculture problems using digital technology. That's a very sort of brief summary, which misses many interesting details about why digital ag is important. But the Center for Digital Ag is meant to be a catalyst. It's really meant to be a center that brings together people to create new projects, new efforts, new collaborations, new education programs, and kind of drive something that has been happening in the ag world, which is an increasing use of technology, but without as much direct collaboration as we think there ought to be, and that's been expanding dramatically now with CDA. As you can imagine, things like productivity and sustainability really can benefit a lot from technical innovations, from industry partnerships, and so that's a major goal for the center. as well as a better trained workforce to enable these kinds of technologies to actually be deployed into real products. And we have been very successful on the research side. We have a number of major funded research grants. AIFARMS is the one that I'll talk about. Wrong button. Pointer doesn't work. Okay, never mind. So AIFARMS is a national AI institute that is primarily funded by the USDA. And I'll say more about the organization and structure of that in a few minutes. And then we also have on the bottom left there a Science and Technology Center funded by the NSF. This is led by Cornell, but Illinois is a major partner in that, along with University of Arizona. We won a competition last year called the Farm of the Future that was run by the USDA. It's a national competition, so that project just started last year. And we're just starting the second growing season for that project. And then we also have some other interesting projects. Direct for Ag is a smaller project, but it's especially interesting because it's sort of a way, its intended goal is to envision the future of ag extension as digital technologies become more prevalent in ag. So they're doing pilot projects to understand how extension units across the country should evolve. And there are many more funded smaller projects, which I won't really go through in any kind of detail. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on clickers. So let me ignore that. I've managed to blank my screen. So my because I'm responding, and also there's a pop-up message on my screen which you cannot reach.
So you want one? If it's
I have a clicker.
Okay.
I just don't. That's not the problem. It's actually the projector connection that. It's okay. I don't think it matters because you can't see the pop-up, right? Yeah. Okay. It doesn't matter. As long as I can. Yeah, I can move without this. I'm good. Yeah. In addition to these sort of older projects or projects that started in the early days, we've started a number of research themes in CDA, which are creating new research directions with a little bit of seed funding. And these are the areas of food system security, so broader issues of resilience and technology for doing things like digital tracking for the food supply chain. Rural networking, because rural networking, in fact, lack of wireless networking is a major bottleneck to deploying digital agriculture applications. And we are looking at how to integrate networking and edge computing to make digital ag applications much more effective. Autonomous farming is a broad research area. There are big components of it in AIFARMS and in the Farm of the Future, but there's also new directions that we're pursuing in autonomous farming, and then the same with livestock management. So we're using non-invasive technologies like computer vision and audio to monitor livestock and detect disease and other issues. We have a pretty broad and strong set of workforce development programs. In fact, one of the earliest things that we did was a joint computer science plus crop sciences degree, undergraduate degree, which is a 4-year integrated degree program. It's one of many CS plus X degrees that we have launched at Illinois. We now have a CS plus animal sciences degree as well. And Matt actually runs a CS plus crop sciences bachelor's degree. CDA is launching a new Master of Engineering degree in digital agriculture, which to our knowledge is the first one of its kind. And it's really meant to be a professional online master's degree for particularly aimed at people in the workforce so that they can take this in the evenings and weekends and so on. And it comes with a bunch of certificates if you only want a particular skill that you want to learn, like with 2 or 3 courses. We have a whole number of other activities, including K-12, including community engagement and community colleges. I think one of the most successful and fast-growing ones is an REU program to bring in undergraduate students in summers to do research projects at Illinois for all the CDA projects. And we partner closely with Tuskegee, which is one of the institutions in the AIFARMS Institute. That's a historically Black college and university, one of the most prominent ones, but we're expanding that now. We now have an REU site that was funded by an NSF grant to expand the REU engagements. I'll say a few words about the farm of the future before I get to AIFARMS, because this is one of the projects that I think would be particularly a good context to look for collaboration opportunities with people here. And in fact, I've had several conversations already this morning about potential collaborations or things that we can try out. So the Farm of the Future, like I said, is a USDA-funded grant. There's a whole video, which just, if you're familiar with the campus, this video would be interesting. I am going to skip the video because I don't think it will matter so much. But it's, the main point was that it's only like 1.5 miles from the engineering part of campus, and it's less than 0.5 mile from the ag part of campus. So it's a very convenient facility. And the goal of it is to be an agricultural test bed where we can develop commodity crops, grow them in production settings in an integrated operation with livestock, but then use that setting as a way to evaluate, to prototype and scale up and evaluate digital ag technologies. That was the main principle behind this test bed, because we have a lot of funded research projects on digital ag at Illinois. And then those technologies are being communicated to farmers through extension. So we have a strong farmer communication program and demonstration program, as well as strong industry engagement to demonstrate these technologies. And there are 6 thrusts within the Farm of the Future. And I'll just quickly go through them here. But what I think is relevant, perhaps for you all, is that all of these are areas where we would love to be able to collaborate. So for example, if you were doing research on something that you would like to try out in a somewhat more production scale setting, or collaborate with people at Illinois on evaluating it, this is a great context in which we could do that. So the first one here is remote sensing and IoT for precision farming, where we're combining mostly environmental sensors and other agricultural sensors with LoRa for communication. The second one is under canopy robotics for sustainable farm management. And I'll say quite a bit more about the use of ground robots for a variety of agricultural management tasks. We use both robots and drones. The drones don't really show up, but in fact, they are part of the operation. The third area is what I mentioned earlier, which is exploring different kinds of rural connectivity technologies, including 5G with CBRS and satellite, as well as LoRa and other low bandwidth technologies. But you really need much higher bandwidths in order to be able to collect and manage and use image and video data on the farms. LoRa just doesn't cut it to that. But then we're also looking at how edge computing can greatly reduce the volume of data that needs to be communicated back to the cloud. We are running this as an integrated livestock and cropping operation. Let me say that is a plan. We still need some infrastructure. Believe it or not, the lack of fencing is the limiting factor of allowing livestock out in those fields. We actually have cover crops they could graze on, but not a way to keep the animals in. And some watering is of course critical as well. So those are 2 things that we are going to add, but the goal here is to have an integrated farm and livestock operation at this test bed. And then there's a major effort to make the technologies that we develop accessible to smallholder farmers and minority farmers at low cost. And a particular kind of principle behind a lot of the work we do is what we call scale neutral technologies, things that can be used at both small scale and large scale operations, and in particular that are very, very modular and can be scaled up or down as needed. And we work closely with Tuskegee. Tuskegee is actually creating a replica of the Farm of the Future at a somewhat smaller scale at Tuskegee University in Alabama. They have very strong communication and farmer conference programs at Tuskegee. And then we have a strong socioeconomics thrust at both in the Farm of the Future and in AIFARMS, led by our Ag and Consumer Economics Department. Professor Madhu Khanna is the lead on both of these projects. So these are the 6 thrusts in the Farm of the Future project. that's all I have to say about that. Let me stop and see if anyone has any questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this data that you have, is it
Yeah.
publicly available? Can anyone
Well-
access the data and then?
So that's a very good question. We have a variety of different data sets that we are collecting in different projects. In fact, there are other projects at Illinois which have much larger data sets and far more funding for collecting data. Many of these are either available now or we're making them available now. But one of the main efforts in AIFARMS is actually to try and systematize that. So to provide a common portal where people can access these data sets and use them for research. And we're also partnering with so there are 3 other USDA-funded AI institutes for agriculture who are also collecting data as well. And so there's an assistant director of data management in AIFARMS, and she's kind of coordinating with the other institutes to create this portal for making data available. So our goal is to do that.
This is a topic we can discuss, of course, afterward.
Yeah.
What I find both from University of Chicago and the other places, that what you will find, the data is often corrupted. It may be because the packets have been dropped, the sensors have gotten calibrated
sure,
and all
right,
over time.
right.
So sharing the data early on and working with the corrupted and sort of bad data is actually a prerequisite for sort of working in this sort of open systems.
Yeah. So I think right. Okay. So we can talk more about this offline. I think there is a need for technical research to actually detect that kind of data because it's a pervasive problem, and a lot of time and effort in data collection goes into curating the data. Not just curating, actually, it's even before that, it's quality checks on the data. And so that data pipeline is a major challenge in practice. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to dive into AIFARMS. This is it's a part of the National AI Institutes program that was created by it's sort of a government-wide coordinated effort to invest in artificial intelligence research that actually came out of a report from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in 2017, if I remember right. And they explicitly said we need to invest in major research efforts in the AI area. And that went on to become a major funded effort with, at this point now, 18 institutes, each one funded to the tune of about $20 billion over 5 years across many different domains. So the interesting thing about this program is that there are strong AI research aspects to every institute. Think of it as foundational AI research. But in fact, there's also a very strong focus on use-inspired AI research where you're using AI to solve societal problems in many different disciplines. So like I said, there are 4 of these so far in agriculture, and a 5th one is actually about to be announced. We've been waiting for it for the last few weeks. It'll literally be coming out any day. But there are also institutes in things like climate change, in physics, several in education, in resilience, in trustworthy AI, in areas like this, intended to use AI for solving important societal problems. So AIFARMS is one of these. We were funded by the USDA in the very first round in 2020. So we're kind of a little bit over halfway through our 5-year cycle. And it's led by the Center for Digital Agriculture at Illinois. There are 7 partnering institutions, 6 besides Illinois. So these include Tuskegee University, as I said, Michigan State University, the University of Chicago, also the Donald Danforth Plant Sciences Center, which is a nonprofit center based in St. Louis, and Argonne National Labs, as well as the USDA Agriculture Research Station at Illinois. So where does AI come into the picture? I probably don't have to tell this audience what the biggest challenge facing world agriculture is, which is the need to grow food production to feed 70% more people. At a very high level, we think that conventional technologies are not going to be enough to solve the challenges that we face in scaling up food production in this way and still remain sustainable and environmentally friendly. And in particular, to do that in the face of fixed land, maybe even reducing land, or reducing rural population, severe environmental constraints, but also challenges from climate change. Right? These are really hard constraints we have to solve. And so we don't think conventional technologies are enough, although they will be critical. AI can help in two broad ways, and this is very 20,000 foot view, oversimplified. There's a lot of details behind these, but I think they capture some of the principles. One of them is that AI can really improve the robustness and effectiveness of autonomous solutions in agriculture. And autonomy can help in a couple of different ways. One is labor substitution, but in fact, labor substitution is not the biggest challenge. There are particular areas where it is in livestock and harvesting, where labor substitution is critical because of lack of labor, and in fact, shrinking labor. But in many other areas of ag, the biggest problem is that you have very few people managing large farms. And so we use very environmentally harmful techniques like spraying uniformly across hundreds of thousands of acres. In fact, the whole monoculture farming practices today lead to a number of challenges where you have very few people managing very large farming operations. And you have very similar issues in livestock. With autonomy, you can greatly improve the effectiveness of a small number of people. Human augmentation is a way to think about it. And by doing that, to get better, reduce environmental impacts, achieve better soil health, achieve improved animal welfare outcomes, and so on. So that's one broad principle of how AI can help. The second one is that data in agriculture is incredibly diverse. So both the sources of data are diverse, but also the spatial variability and the temporal variability is huge. And so being able to analyze these data sets in order to create effective predictions, models, and decision making can be very challenging. Machine learning has made big advances in this area. Heterogeneous data mining, network mining, and a variety of other techniques are fundamentally tackling exactly this broad challenge. And so this is another way in which AI and machine learning techniques can have an important role in dealing with it. And so based on these two kind of principles, the mission of AIFARMS is to develop foundational advances in AI. In other words, actually move the ball forward on the underlying AI techniques themselves, applicable to all different domains, not just agriculture. But then to use those advances to actually to ensure that agriculture is environmentally sustainable, affordable, and accessible to diverse farming communities, while also increasing productivity and achieving the productivity gains that we are going. So AIFARMS is organized as 6 thrusts. And Mitch, I have to apologize. You've probably seen these slides at least 3 times. So I'm not sure you're going to learn much new in this talk. But AIFARMS is organized around 6 thrusts. There's a core foundational AI research component in AIFARMS. And I'll say a little bit about that in the next slide. But then we use that for 4 different areas where we're closely integrating AI and agriculture research. And I'll just mention them briefly and say a little bit about them later on in the talk. One of them is autonomous farming for crops, and in particular the use of ground robots and drones to improve. To improve agricultural outcomes in row crops. The second is labor optimization for livestock, and in particular the use of non-invasive technologies like computer vision and audio for monitoring livestock in production farms. The third is environmental resilience, and this actually cuts 2 ways. One is to develop plants that are much more resilient to the effects of climate change. Things like elevated ozone, elevated carbon dioxide, temperature fluctuations, drought resilience, and so on. The second is reducing environmental impact. So the pollution caused by a variety of different agricultural practices. They're all kind of bundled into this one area because they're quite complementary and interrelated. And the fourth direction is soil monitoring and soil health. How we can understand, monitor, predict the effects of farming practices on the nutrient profiles in soils and the nutrient fluxes in soils, on the microbiome, and the effect of those on plant and plant production. And then we have 2 cross-cutting thrusts. So on the bottom left there, you see technology adoption and outreach. This is the one that's on socioeconomic topics in technology adoption, led by Madhu Khanna. And the goal there is to understand the economic barriers in adopting advanced technologies in agriculture. and the incentives that can enable farmers to adopt technologies that may sometimes not pay off for a long time. In fact, even may have some costs, but that can greatly improve the environmental profile of the soil, long-term soil health of agriculture. And the last one is education and outreach. I mentioned a number of education topics for CDA more broadly. AIFARMS works closely with these existing education programs in CDA. AIFARMS started the REU program, for example. We're also contributing to some of the K-12 education activities and creating. So one example is the Digital Ag in a Box kit, which I won't say too much more about, but it's basically a kit meant for high school students to be able to do interesting projects in digital ag. And we're working with some schools both in Illinois and Tuskegee and Alabama to deploy this in schools. So I said we're working on foundational challenges in agriculture. We have a pretty broad team. In fact, I have 16 people whose images are lined up on the slide. That's about a third of the AIFARMS, sorry, not a third. It's a little over, it's about 40% of the AIFARMS team. And we work on a variety of different topics, but kind of the metaphor that I want to use here to present, to motivate this, is that there are a number of agriculture challenges that we are trying to solve. At the end of the day, this is the final goal, right, of all of this research. Things like high throughput phenotyping or disease detection or predicting nutrient fluxes, water management, a variety of other goals like that, where AI can play a role. And so there are what NSF, I think NSF coined this term, use-inspired AI research challenges that are needed in order to achieve these goals. And that's kind of the stem of this plant here. So challenges like autonomous navigation, like heterogeneous data analysis, like identifying individual animals in a livestock operation, like a lot of edge data analytics problems for dealing with data in the field, and many others. These are just 4 examples of use-inspired AI problems that need to be solved for ag. And those challenges are kind of gated by the state of the art, the limitations in the state of the art in the underlying AI itself. And so the foundational AI research that we are doing is specifically aimed at making these use-inspired AI tasks or goals more effective. And so that bottom is not readable. I apologize. That is not meant to be readable, at least not on a regular projector. It might work in Zoom. But I'll quickly take you through the 7 topics that we have in foundational AI. The first one is open world AI. I won't spend too much time, but if you're interested in talking more, I'd be happy to do that. But open world AI is sort of a catch-all phrase for all of the challenges that come up when you want to deploy an AI-based application in the real world. And the most common problem really is the domain gap between the kind of the training data you might have used in developing machine learning models versus the situations you actually encounter in the field. So common problems in agriculture include things like transferring between different crop species or plant species or varieties is even more common. Also different kinds of weeds, different kinds of soil conditions or environmental conditions that might come up in actually deploying these kinds of problems. But that's just one part of the problem. You might actually have completely missing data when you're training a model. So missing classes of data. And that can actually cause worse results, even though the data that was not missing, because you mislabel or misclassify the data that you observe in the field. And so this interference between known and unknown classes is a major research area as well. So there are a number of different research projects in AIFARMS and outside that are dealing with open world AI. The second is computer vision. Computer vision is not the problem. Computer vision is kind of a category where there are many problems within it. For example, so occlusion, in fact, I haven't listed occlusion here, but few shot text generation, multi-object tracking, segmentation, occlusion, a variety of other foundational challenges. You can probably tell these are not specific to agriculture, but we've particularly identified areas that are needed to make progress in agriculture and are also applicable to other areas. Heterogeneous information fusion, I mentioned this earlier, but problems like, or techniques like network mining, multi-view learning, and multiple kinds of data fusion can be quite important in dealing with agriculture. Learning for control is important because robotics in particular can become much more robust in open deployments in the field. You don't have the kind of control environments you might have on a factory floor where robotics has been the most successful to date in practice. In commercial settings, you really have very, very unpredictable, uncontrolled conditions. And it's quite challenging to make autonomous systems work in these contexts. Traditional control systems are not robust enough to deal with unexpected situations. And so AI can be you can try to develop pure learning-based solutions for robotics, but you can also combine AI, machine learning-based techniques with traditional control. And that's, I think, closer to the approach that we've taken in AIFARMS to be able to greatly improve the robustness of the robots in the field. But there are also other aspects of robotics as well, which includes things like teams of robots and teams of autonomous agents cooperating on tasks in order to achieve scalability, especially for small equipment on large farms. Integrating domain knowledge is become a widespread research area in many different domains. So physics-guided machine learning, for example, biology, healthcare, many other domains are looking at this. In agriculture as well, there's deep domain knowledge in both for crops and for livestock and biology in general, and trying to incorporate that, in particular, the research challenges and how you incorporate domain knowledge into the training of a machine learning model is the underlying foundational problem. But there are a variety of particular foundational topics that we want, domain knowledge that we want to kind of incorporate, like livestock behavior, like livestock health, like soil behaviors, crop behavior, and many others. Federated learning at the edge is kind of a combination of edge learning, distributed machine learning in the field for a couple of reasons. One is to greatly reduce the need for communication, the need for data transfer off the field. The other is to greatly improve closed loop online decision making when you're doing online decision making, real-time decision making in the field with edge data or field data. And so both of these directions are significant areas that are needed for that. And finally, human-centered autonomy. So really in practice, autonomous systems are going to be deployed under the control of farm managers. There are going to be people in the loop making decisions using all kinds of autonomous equipment, including large autonomous tractors that John Deere announced last year, down to small ground robots or drones. Managing these systems, understanding the decisions they are making, interacting with them, controlling them, helping them recover in times of failure. These are all research challenges that you need to solve in human-centered autonomy. Those are some of the issues we're dealing with in this topic. So that's the foundational AI kind of portfolio in AIFARMS. Again, let me stop there and see if anyone has any questions or comments. And if not, I'll just say one last thing, which is if any of you are interested in collaborating on any of these, especially use cases for some of these in research that you are doing, I'd love to talk about that, because that's part of our goal here, is to take some of the techniques that we've developed and be able to use them to solve ag problems. It's really the end goal.
So which of these has been really successful in your test bed, right?
Good question, yeah. I think the things that we've probably had the most progress on have been in robotics, in edge computing, in computer vision, certain aspects of computer vision. I mean, each of these is very broad, right?
Yeah.
There are some interesting advances in human-centered autonomy for robot failure recovery in particular. In domain knowledge, so we're working on NLP techniques. I would say we haven't gotten very far yet, but we have some promising ideas in that I'm hoping in the next 1 year will start bearing fruit. Those are probably the most promising to date, and I'll show a couple of examples of these. But we're also working quite a lot on things like network mining for heterogeneous data, open world machine learning and AI for object detection, and now for segmentation. That's been quite successful as well. Yeah.
What has been the biggest challenge so far?
You know, there are many. I don't know what I'd pick as the biggest, but I'll mention one or two. One big challenge is lack of good data sets. This is pervasive in ag. There are relatively few labeled quality data sets that you can use to build machine learning models. And in fact, the kind of unfortunate part is that there are many data sets out there. Many of them are proprietary. They're owned by either farmers or companies, and so we can't access them. There are some public domain data sets. There are lots of papers, and many papers come with the data sets that were used for the papers, right? But they are completely disjointed. There's no coordination. There's no way to connect them to other papers. You can't use them to build systematic learning outcomes if you can't correlate data from different papers. And so it's not just a lack of data, it's also a lack of the coordination to make that data useful in practice. And then it's also labeling. So even when you have a large data set, to be able to actually learn from that, you need either labeling or some way to overcome the limited amount of data.
Is there any effort to provide the labeled data set?
Well, there are multiple efforts, not just ours. In fact, just today I was talking to Dennis and Jim about the work that's doing here on providing a common API for ag data sets. In AIFARMS, we are coordinating with the other ag data institutes to create a portal for making all of our data available publicly. And as part of that, providing the labeled data and the ability to develop machine learning models. We're not working on the APIs. So that's one thing. There are at least three different steps to this process. You have to get the data, you have to get labeled data. You have to provide the APIs that provide standardized access to the data, so the software interfaces. And then you have to actually overcome all the political hurdles to make this available broadly into the public. And they're kind of each its own problem. We're working on the first one. We're hoping to leverage people like yours and others on the second one for the APIs. And we're not trying to tackle the political one, at least not yet. I think that we've been recommended to do it. I don't know if we are going to have the cloud. I think it's a very long term.
Changing from ADE. So could you briefly introduce the current status of the project? How many years in total?
Yeah.
Where you are and what are the key outcomes and products you expect at the end?
Yeah, that's a big question. Some of that I think will become clearer as I go through the rest of the slides, because I haven't come to the individual thrusts yet. But I just want to, but I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of those. We're just over halfway through the project. So 2.5 years was at the end of February. Our third year ends on August 31. And then we have 2 more years plus 1 year no cost extension. So we're about halfway. And we were the first round, by the way, of AI institutes for that. All AI institutes, that was 2020. There was one generation in the next 2021, another one in 2022. So the other institutes came after us. And in terms of outcomes, I think you'll probably get a sense of it as I go through the different thrusts in the next few slides. But then stop me afterwards if I haven't answered the question. Okay, so let me start. This is slide. So let me start with autonomous crop management. I have some kind of very high-level slides which I want to go through very quickly and not waste time on this. But the vision here is that we think teams of small, inexpensive, autonomous systems, robots and drones, can really enable significant advances in both productivity, sustainability, environmental resilience, and enhanced profitability. But there are important challenges we have to solve in enabling those, and those are some of the user-inspired AI tasks that I've listed here. So autonomous navigation is critical, manage swarms of teams of robots is critical in order to reach scale, to have a single person manage like multiple robots with eyes off. Edge data analytics is critical, both for closed loop control and for video and image data. Manipulation is a very hard problem. Harvesting is a major goal. We have only a small piece there. One of the other institutes led by Washington State, where they work a lot more on specialty crops as a major effort in harvesting, for example. But it's a big challenge because you're talking about soft objects in open conditions and very cluttered conditions. It's really very interesting and hard. And then there are perception challenges like classification, like segmentation, like occlusion, which I've not listed. But these are some of the challenges that we are working on. And I've listed here some of the foundational AI topics that lead into these. In the interest of time, I'm not going to enumerate them, but you might be able to read them from the back. So I'll give a couple of examples of the results that we've had in this area. Some of this is a little bit older. These are in like our first year of work. So one of these was improving lane following for under canopy robots. And most importantly here, there was a whole generation of these robots that had been commercialized and uses LiDAR with GPS as for navigation. And this has two problems. LiDAR is very expensive, even though this is just black and white LiDAR. 2D black and white, it's still, 2D LiDAR, it's still very expensive. And second, GPS does not work under the canopy. You get too much interference once the crops grow beyond a certain height. And so the goal here was to be able to use inexpensive video cameras to guide navigation. And so a robotics group led by Girish Chaudhary developed an algorithm called crop follow, which allows you to navigate fields. So you can see a video grab on the bottom left there, and that's relatively early in the season when the plants are sparse. But then as the season progresses, you can see that the conditions have changed quite significantly. But the models have to adapt. They have to be robust under these different conditions in order to get successful navigation driven by machine learning. And they in particular use two neural networks to predict the angle and distance heading of the robot in the field between the row crops. And they were able to show almost half a kilometer of navigation using this versus only 286 meters with LiDAR and GPS. And in fact, they've increased that to over a kilometer since then. So it's far more robust now. And it's at 40x lower cost in terms of the cost of the sensors that go into the robot itself. So that's a really dramatic saving in terms of the cost. That paper appeared in Robotic Systems and Software. And then we actually worked with them right after that on a system called a prox caliper, which is on tuning these neural networks to greatly reduce the compute cost of doing the navigation on the robot. And so in particular, model pruning is a way to compress neural network models while preserving accuracy. And traditionally, that's always done without knowing what application you're using the models for. So they basically compress the model and retune it, retrain it and compress more and retrain more to try and preserve accuracy. And so you can, if you compress too much, you will then end up losing inference accuracy, and that can cause errors in the navigation of the robot. And this is just a plot of the frame rate at which the video grab is coming in versus the heading error on the x-axis in the prediction error in the degrees of, so the degree error in the prediction of the heading. And what you can see is that for two different neural networks, the error increases significantly as the frame rate increases. And basically what we did in this paper is to develop a technique to incorporate an application level quality metric, which in this case is navigation without crashes. So as long as you can navigate without crashes, we don't actually care what the errors are. So if the errors have increased. So we have basically a tuning system that that does model pruning with the application awareness, taking application awareness into account. And if you compare that versus pruning without awareness, you can get a 5.3x additional speed up in the computations for the neural network. And I can take you through the, so I haven't talked about how we go about doing this. We have a two-stage calibration system followed by an optimization to actually pick and choose the right model parameters and pruning levels for achieving these results. But the consequence of all this is that you can replace, so the previous robot was using a $900 Intel NUC That was actually overkill, so that's not a fair baseline. But the best case for the model without this approach would have been a $99 NVIDIA Jetson. We showed you can actually replace those with a $35 Raspberry Pi and have enough capacity over to run yet another neural network to do some kind of real-time task, for example, measuring phenotypes or detecting disease or whatever. So that was the kind of consequence of this work, is that you can bring down the cost dramatically for these kinds of models. So yeah.
So is that adaptive pruning? So is it based on the context, depending on how much there is canopy covering?
No.
What are you doing at one time?
We are doing this entirely ahead of time.
I see.
Because pruning is a pretty expensive operation itself.
Yeah.
And so we're actually tuning so we are running the robot to gather information about crashes. And you can simulate that, but there are not good simulators that have fidelity. And so we actually had some students out in the field doing this for like 2 months. They were doing all kinds of measurements. But offline, you can do that, tune the model parameters for the particular robot in the field. The robustness for the different parts of the season comes from the underlying crop follow algorithm, which was the previous work.
I see.
That we've not changed. So the navigation algorithm is still the same.
So they work in tandem, sort of, that crops caliper.
Basically, it's the same algorithm. We've just sped up the neural networks that it uses. So it uses ResNet 18, that's all it is. And all we've done is sped up ResNet 18. The algorithm is exactly the same.
I see. Yeah, we have some work on online tuning.
Okay.
Live tweaking thing.
Yeah, we should talk about that. We
Yeah.
have a system that does 3-stage tuning, ahead of time, then install time, and then run time, called a prox tuner, which is actually a precursor to this, but that hasn't been used for any ag applications. So I didn't try to bring it up, but I'd love to talk to you more.
Did I hear it correctly that you have been able to optimize Raspberry Pi such that your FPS is more than 30?
No. I'm not sure if I communicated this.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that we've optimized the neural networks
Yes.
so that we can run them on a Raspberry Pi.
And then what type of FPS you could get?
We are able to get, so that's what the y-axis here shows. What it's showing here is that, I didn't explain this graph, I apologize. This really is just showing the speed up. So the y-axis is all I mentioned. But the FPS, if you do pruning without our system, without knowing what the application quality metric is, then you get just under 50 FPS. And here we're running 2 neural networks, 2 copies of ResNet 80. Okay? But if you do the pruning, knowing the application metric, you can get a 5.3x speed up, so you get just over 200 FPS for
different applications, you need different networks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for every application, you would want to tune it. And the system is actually largely automated in the sense that if you can give us a function that measures the quality metric for a particular application, and then you say, and you give us a neural network and some training data, the rest of this process is sort of fully automatic.
The robot, only needs 1 FPS to actually properly navigate.
No, the robot needs, I forget now, but I actually have other graphs which are not on the slide. I don't know offhand how much it needs, but it's in the range of 20 to 40. It's in the range of 20. It actually depends on no, sorry. So we did 2 experiments, 2 different applications. One was a non-ag application of an autonomous vehicle, and that one there was a trade-off between FPS and efficiency. But I don't want to distract this, but in this case, so call it about 20 FPS.
So the robot's not using your Raspberry Pi. It's using
Not currently. No. It's not even using a Jetson. They're still using the NUC. But that's because it's a company, right? Companies don't move fast enough. But but they could, is the point. And I remember now. So the FPS depends on the speed of the robot.
Right.
So the faster you want the robot to move, the more the FPS.
Isn't there something called a tiny ML that?
Oh yeah, there's a whole
use?
field.
Is it an alternate version of this, or is it, how should I think about this tiny ML efforts and then this type of work.
Yeah. So TinyML is a whole, okay, it's a kind of it's a whole field of research on how you can bring down machine learning models to be able to run on small resource constrained devices.
Right.
There's quite a lot of research on that. There's not a whole lot of research that is used with certain kinds of, so there's a lot of, there's specific approximations people have developed, like model pruning for this goal, right? For bringing down the cost of those networks. I think the main thing that's new here is that those techniques don't take the application quality metrics into account. They're completely agnostic of the application. So they optimize the models as much as they can offline, and then they incorporate them into whatever application you want to use. And what we've done here is basically show how you can incorporate that into a automatic tuning system that takes the application quality into account. And for cyber physical systems in particular, that can be even harder because you have a very expensive quality metric. You're actually running a robot out in the field. And so the two-stage calibration, which I didn't really talk about here, dramatically brings down the number of measurement runs you need. That was the x-axis, which I didn't explain. So if you were doing pruning without our two-stage calibration, you would need like 35 measurement runs to get to this point in the pruning process. And with ours, you can do it in like I think 8 or 9 runs. And the reason is because we're doing this two-stage calibration that uses estimates to narrow down the search, the number of measurement runs. So for cyber physical systems, it's not only automatic, but it's also greatly sped up. Okay, so one of the other main outcomes in the whole AIFARMS project has been on cover crops, and in particular, cover crops, as probably many of you know, have many important advantages for agriculture, for soil health, for nutrient outflows, for soil erosion. But cover crops are really not widely adopted for multiple reasons. Let me back up just for a second and replay that. And so what you see here is a robot planting cover crops in the field in July 2021. And in a moment, you'll see the backside, you can see the cover crop seeds being sprayed from the back of the robot as it goes. The important point is that it's happening even before harvest, which doesn't happen today. Today, all practices happen either after harvest or they do it above the canopy. And so the cover crops are much less effective. Second, the cost of planting is quite substantial. And so this is the final cover crop plant, the results after planting at the Farm of the Future. And AIFARMS has had several outcomes in this area. So this is a collaboration with the Farm of the Future project. They planted over 100 acres of cover crops entirely using autonomous robots. They're scaling that up to 10,000 acres this year from a different funded project called iCover. And the claim from the company, this is their projection, is that they can bring down the cost of planting cover crops from about $15 an acre to $5 an acre. This is ignoring the cost of the seed, but this is the cost of the rest of the cost of planting. That's a big saving. That's one important factor. The second important factor is that you can plant ahead of time before harvest, which greatly improves the effectiveness of the cover crop. And there were a number of AIFARMS results that kind of benefit this kind of work, including better autonomous navigation for over 1 kilometer, greatly reduced robot costs, and also a lot of survey results from the ag economics, the Trust 5 work on what barriers will exist to the adoption of this kind of cover crop planting technology. So I am probably out of time at this point. I'm going to skip the rest of the slides here. And we had slides on labor optimization, on livestock and environmental resilience, which I'm going to have to skip over. Maybe in the interest of some of the people in the room who work on, and I know work on this. So there's several projects on doing, for example, high throughput phenotyping, and so predicting phenotypes from sensor data, on genome sequence completion, and on GWAS, all driven by AI research. And we've coordinated these three projects around a common set of sorghum lines that have been sequenced by by two different people who have contributed to the data that we're building on in this work, and which knows them. Okay, so I apologize for having to skip a lot of potentially interesting slides here. Let me just end with this slide. So we have a very, I think, significant effort in the education and outreach side. We have, for example, developed not developed, we have deployed farm bots you can buy, and they're very interesting technology if you've not tried them out. It's a DIY kind of technology with hardware and software for doing experimental work on all kinds of plants. And it's a great educational tool. So we deployed them in 8 different schools and other universities in Illinois. We've also deployed them at Tuskegee University. So the Tuskegee team actually did that with some REU students. We're developing a digital ag in a box kit, which includes some sensors and robots and drones, and the projects that go with them. And I also mentioned an REU activity that has grown quite substantially. And we had 12 students in 2022. So they started in 2021, and we're doing it for the 3rd year this year as well, from all over. I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to take any questions that people may have.
Nice presentation. It takes me a little bit to get caught up on all the work that's going on, so it's just like a catch up for me as well.
Of course, yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about your collaboration with Tuskegee? Is Tuskegee mostly educational and outreach related, or are they contributing to some of these thrusts in terms of research?
Yeah.
And how do you anticipate, if not that much yet, how do you anticipate moving forward? How does that might fit together?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts. Tuskegee is very much working on the research as well. They are actually developing what they call a microsite at Tuskegee with phenotyping capabilities and some of the same kind of data collection activities we are doing at Illinois. They're doing there at Tuskegee as well. Also for livestock, they're replicating so we work on pigs at Illinois, they work on goats at Tuskegee, but they're using the same kinds of computer vision data collections. They're installing cameras and collecting data sets, annotating them, and then so that we can use them for computer vision challenges for both kinds of livestock.
Are the Tuskegee folks, would you say they're more engineering oriented or plant science oriented?
No.
Some of these thrusts you talk about phenotyping at this microsite.
Yeah, they're more ag. So in fact, the people involved with us are really ag people from both the crops and the livestock side in the AIFARMS project.
Okay.
More recently, they have brought in some engineering people in other joint collaborations. So this engagement has grown quite dramatically. There are multiple proposals we've worked on together. There's other projects we've worked on. They're part of the Farm of the Future, as I said. So with those, they're also bringing in some computer science and other engineering people as well. It's really growing quite fast.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
I have a question, very high level, a little bit non-technical. Very nice talk. How do you get people from such diverse backgrounds? People talk to each other.
So how much time do we have? Honestly, it's a process.
Okay.
And it also is hit or miss. It will sometimes work and sometimes not. But really, the early days of CDA, we probably in the first year had many meetings, workshops, discussions, identifying collaborative research directions, having people make presentations about their work, having lightning talk sessions and kind of dating sessions. We're trying to find connections between people. And many of them did not happen. Some of them did. We had 2 rounds of seed funding in CDA to be able to encourage people to put in joint proposals. That was probably the most concrete, I think, successful outcome for creating collaborative research projects. Many of them have withered on the vine. So I can't say we funded 25 projects. I would say that maybe 5 or 6 of them have led to longer engagements. Now, except for there were probably additional 5 or 6 that fed directly into AIFARMS in the very early days. So within a year and a half of CDA, we wrote the AIFARMS proposal because these people had started talking to each other. So it kind of automatically pulled people in who were starting to work. So it's a process. I think funding is a super great motivator in something like this. And so having a way to bring in that kind of incentive to fund research projects can be very, very effective. And what I found is that, so personally, my opinion is that one of the biggest impacts of these kind of large institutes and centers is to encourage people on the engineering side who have not been engaged with ag to think about these collaborations, because there's so much funding in other areas like in healthcare, security, defense, national in entertainment, all kinds of other fields, right? Ag has really been pretty far behind on that scope. And so to compete against that is hard, but if you create the climate and you create the funding, they will come. And so now, like I said, we have probably 25, 30 faculty from the College of Engineering who are involved in different collaborations, about 15 of them, no, yeah, probably about 15 of them in India.
This might be
Yeah.
a little bit off track question, but you might like it. Could
Yeah.
you make a connection with compilers and LLVMs in these projects?
So we actually don't use LLVM itself, but we do use compilers quite a bit because a lot of our work these days is focusing on edge computing. And in fact, a lot of the edge computing work in AIFARMS is really my work. And I think it's a key piece, right, for ag, and you know this very well, you've done a lot of it yourself. And so I think that we are building on LLVM for a system called HPVM, Heterogeneous Parallel Virtual Machine. And we use HPVM for compiling for edge applications. The approximate computing work had one compiler-based paper, but the later work was all runtime-based. But that is also aiming at edge applications also. So there are multiple goals here. Also, one new direction that we're just starting up is in this networking plus edge computing area. They were talking about distributed applications. So there we want to take HPVM and use it for distributed applications in the field. And there again, I think there will be an interesting compiler to make it highly programmable. So I'd love to chat more actually about that.
Is there a commercialization component in this one?
Well, so there are definitely outcomes that are commercializable. Some of the robot work that you saw on the slides are being adopted by EarthSense, the company. That company existed before AIFARMS. One of the co-founders, Girish Chaudhary, is a co-PI on AIFARMS. So the robotics work is his, not the manipulation, but all the field robotics is his, the ground robots. And so they have adopted, for example, they were trying the crop follow algorithm. They are the ones who adopted the cover cropping technologies, and they are actually the ones who are deploying that. They are a close partner in Farm of the Future. We are also working with Cargill now on the livestock monitoring to evaluate some of the technology that are coming out of the computer vision work for livestock. And so there are other conversations happening as well, but it takes time. I think that the next 2 years are going to be critical for this. Okay, thank you very much.